Wes Streeting, hopefully you can hear me, Health Secretary. Lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much again for coming on the Camilla Tominey Show.
Unfortunately, I heard quite a lot of that. Good morning.
Did you? Well, I just said that you're the most ambitious man in the Labour Party, if not the country, and I don't think you're going to disabuse me of that notion. But let's very swiftly move on to your announcement about your NHS app. Now, this target, you're going to reduce the 18-month wait to an 18-week wait by the end of Parliament. Is that right? That's quite ambitious. Will you stand down from your post if you do not achieve that target?
Well, I don't think the Prime Minister will keep me in my job if I'm not delivering for patients. That's what he expects me to do, because we've got what is objectively the worst crisis in the NHS's history today, and waiting times that are far too high. That's why the Prime Minister and I tomorrow are setting out the actions we are taking to get those waiting times down. And yes, that's about the investment the Chancellor announced in the budget, but it is also about the reform that's needed. We've got to modernise the NHS, giving patients more choice, more power, more control, more ease, more convenience over booking their appointments, choice about where to be treated. We'll do that through the NHS app, frankly, bringing the NHS in line with most other service providers in this country. But we're also going to tackle some of the waste and inefficiency we see in the NHS, whether that's actually sending reminders for people to turn up to their appointments in the way that a lot of restaurants do or hairdressers do, so that appointments don't get missed. We're going to make sure that we get rid of unnecessary outpatients appointments that to take up time and valuable clinician time that could be freed up. So a number of really practical things that will help get those waiting times down by the end of the Parliament.
But nothing, no decision or action on social care until 2028. So you've commissioned this review. Why do you need a review? We've been discussing social care for about 5 decades. We've got the deal not recommendations. Why on earth do you need another review? Just take some action on this issue. That's what you promised in opposition.
Well, we are taking action. So in the last 6 months,
no, you're not. You're having a review.
We legislated within the first... Hang on, you've got to listen to the answer. In the first 6 months, we legislated for the first ever fair pay agreements so that we can tackle the workforce crisis. We've delivered the biggest expansion of carers allowance since the 1970s. Just this week, I announced £86 million extra in the Disabled Facilities Grant right now. So between January and April, we should see almost 8,000 home adaptations to give disabled people the independence, freedom and dignity they need to lead their homes lives. And yes,
do we have a social care plan?
Why do we... Well, I've just listed a whole load of practical actions.
Do we have a social care plan,
and then as for
Minister?
As for the Casey Commission, it is precisely because of that, and you're right, decade after decade of failure on social care, that we are choosing to do things differently, asking one of the best-known social reformers in our country, a doer, not a talker, to knock heads together, to build the party political consensus I think we need on this issue. And you won't have to wait a few years for her to report. Next year, she'll be setting out the actions we need to take during this Parliament over the coming years on social care. So we'll be getting on with the job this Parliament. But I think it is a good thing, by the way, I genuinely do, to try and make sure that in terms of the long-term plan, we try and bring political parties together, stop social care being a political football, and stop the race to the bottom that we've seen. You know, if you want to... I mean, look at what happened to Andy Burnham and Gordon Brown in 2010 when their ideas were torpedoed by the Tories, and David Cameron later said he regretted it. Look at Theresa May. You know, her plans were torpedoed by us. So we've got to break this cycle of broken politics, and that's what we're trying to do, because
we'll get a result in 2028.
Lib Dem, SNP governments, we've all failed, and we've got to work together to put it right. And I think if we do that, that will be a big achievement.
I tell you what's been another successive government failure, and that's cracking down. I'm not going to call them grooming gangs. I'm going to call them child rape gangs. Why? I can't understand this. Why is Labour, of all parties, we're talking about thousands of girls from vulnerable communities in the north being raped repeatedly, often gang raped by largely Pakistani men. Why on earth wouldn't you have a public inquiry into this? And I know you're going to say, oh, there was an inquiry by Alexis Jay and that made 20 recommendations. But the scope of that inquiry was really narrow. All of the campaigners and the whistleblowers in this, Maggie Oliver, Jane Senior and others have said you need a public inquiry because this problem is still ongoing. There's been a 10% increase in cases in the last year alone. Why are you resisting a public inquiry?
Well, firstly, we've got to get on with delivering change now. So it is right to say there were 20 recommendations in the previous inquiry. None of those were implemented by the last government. We are going to get on with that. Secondly, you talk about the fact that many of the perpetrators of these rapes and these grooming gangs in towns in the north of England were Pakistani men. The Casey review in Rotherham already identified the fact that it was too often fear of racism, being accused of racism, I should say, or fear of being accused of upsetting community cohesion that saw inaction. We have got no time for that sort of thing. And of course, there was widespread corruption. So I think with respect, we do know what the nature of the challenge is. I think we owe it to victims of past abuses to deliver them justice, and we owe it to women and girls and kids growing up to make sure they don't become the future victims. So we want to get on with this. And I'd just say about Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips, these are people who, outside politics, actually banged up paedophiles, rapists, wife beaters.
Yes,
if you talk to Keir and Jess about why they came into politics, it's because they know that politics has got a big role to play in putting this right.
But Maggie Oliver, the former Greater Manchester police officer who was the one who was instrumental in uncovering widespread abuse in Rochdale, says, and I quote, Sir Keir Starmer is as guilty as anyone over your failures to address the rape gangs when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. He was asleep at the wheel. Maggie Oliver was at the centre of this, and she's been highly critical of the Prime Minister. So you must admit he didn't do enough.
I actually genuinely don't think that's a fair criticism. As Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir opened up a number of historic cases where perpetrators thought they'd gotten away with it. He opened up historic cases to go after those people. He put in place specialist rape prosecutors to build the evidence base to make sure that convictions, which are notoriously hard to achieve in this area, actually came to pass. One of the reasons Keir Starmer came into government, into politics, is because he recognised that the courts can only do so much. The police and the courts need to be given the powers, the tools and the resources to do the job. And that's what, as Prime Minister, he's committed to deliver. Is Labour resisting a public inquiry because it's worried about its Muslim vote? Not at all. We, as I said, we've got an existing inquiry where recommendations haven't been implemented. We should crack on with that. There have been a number of other really powerful inquiries around Rotherham, for example, where there are recommendations where we need to see action. And as we've said to the community and the council in Oldham,
Rochdale rape gang leaders still living in Rochdale.
We would absolutely encourage them. We would absolutely encourage them to undertake their inquiry, and we'd support them to do that. The most important thing on this issue is that we get on with delivering justice for victims and actions taken to protect women and girls and children from any further abuse. And that is what the Prime Minister's focused on. Jess Phillips, as the Victims Minister, has spent her life and career supporting victims of violence against women and girls. That's why you would have thought that a public inquiry would be passionate about and committed to this. It sounds like you would be wanting to commit to a public inquiry. The problem with public inquiries is they take a hell of a lot of time. We've had an inquiry nationally. We've had a series of local inquiries.
You can't take too long to find justice for teenage girls who've been gang raped. Doesn't matter how long it takes. These victims have been horribly let down.
That's why we've got to get on with it.
They deserve justice. This could have been going back to the 1980s. It's carrying on now. You need answers, so you should have a public inquiry.
They do deserve justice. That is what the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and the Victims Minister are all focused on. We've had plenty of recommendations, many of which have not been enacted by our predecessors. We're going to get on with the job to deliver justice for victims and to protect people from becoming future victims.
Okay.
That is our focus. This is something the Prime Minister and
All
the
right.
Victims Minister gave their professional lives to before entering
Okay.
politics, and that's why they're showing the level of drive and commitment now as Prime Minister,
All right.
Home Secretary and Victims Minister that Keir,
Okay.
Yvette and Jess are all showing.
All right. Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed for braving the cold this morning. Great to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you.